Okay, so I am going to walk you through the basic constructions to start. I'm going to do all of them so that way you can see how you should be checking this. Also for online students, you would just be using your online compass but doing the exact same thing. So to do a congruent segment, you would actually start with a segment. And then what you're going to do is on the computer or on your paper, you first have to draw an array. When you're constructing something new, you have to always start with array. I'm going to make my array visibly longer than the original segment. My array has an arrow on one end and an endpoint on the other. I'm going to use my compass to measure the full length of the original segment. When you go to use the compass, make sure you're keeping your pencil either on the inside of the opening or on the outside of the opening. There is an actual difference. You can see two lines there. I don't want two lines, so I'm going to get in the habit of always leaving my pencil on the inside of that compass. That way, even if I go over it a couple times, I have a nice smooth arc. Now also, I'm going to make sure that I make that arc larger than necessary, because when Mrs. Fox is checking your work, you want to make sure that you can see that it obviously comes from the compass and not that someone tried to make something look like an arc by freehand. So I want to obviously be able to tell that this came from the arc of a compass. Since I used my compass to measure this distance, I'm going to copy this distance right over here on this one as well. See how that happened? That's because I did not keep my pencil to the inside. So if I redo it again, there we go. Now I kept it to the inside, it looks good. This would be the other endpoint. So if this was segment AB, your original segment, then segment CD would be congruent to it. So AB, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. Okay. Down here, again, start with an array that is visibly longer than the original. You're going to measure this segment using your compass. Make the arc. Oh, nope, see, that did not go through the end. So I'm going to just adjust it. Okay, now it went through the endpoint. I'm going to copy that same arc over here. Again, I'm making sure they're nice large arcs so I can tell that they were made with a compass. And that is the basic constructions congruent segments. On the back side, you have the congruent angles. So let me actually get a different one here. Okay, here I have a angle A, and what I want to do is create a congruent angle. That's what I'm looking for, is a congruent angle. So again, I'm going to be constructing something new. So since I'm going to be constructing something new, I'm going to start with array. Since that side was a little messed up, I'll make that my arrow end. Fix that. This end would be an endpoint. So you always start with array if you're constructing something new. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a large arc on our original angle. This is the one that I notice a lot of people struggling with in class. So I'm making a large arc. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that same exact arc on my ray. Remember, this is going to be one of the rays of your angle. So you either want to go up on that arc or down on that arc. Some people want to go like this. And you can see that you're not going to be able to figure out where your other ray is. So you can start down there. We want to come all the way up. Okay? And now in our next step, what we need to do is we need to measure how far up that arc does that next ray hit. Because how far up this arc is that other ray going to be going through? So when you open up your compass, you're going to put your compass. Now this is where some people were trying to put their point of their compass on these arrows, and it's not going to work. That arrow doesn't signify anything other than that this line keeps going on forever. That arrow could have been way over here, it could have been here. We have no idea where that arrow is going to be. That's not a placement. So we need to have our points are going to be on that arc we created, and that's the distance you're looking for, is between those 2 points on the arc itself. When you go to measure this, you are going to put an arc there. Make sure your arc is large enough so that way I can tell that it was made with a compass. Okay, so I made that arc with my compass. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my point on my new construction over here. So I'm going to put my point of my compass there, and my arc is already measured, so I'm going to copy that measurement right up here. I make these arcs nice and large so I can obviously see it was made with a compass. Now where that intersection is, that's how far up that arc that other ray hits. So now that I have that, I'm going to be able to connect those with a ray. Maybe we'll call this one angle C. So angle A is congruent to angle C. That's my statement. Okay, those 2 angles are going to be congruent. And see how they look the exact same. They both have this arc, they both have that arc. Okay, you can tell that they obviously look the same size. And they should, because we made them so that they were congruent. We're going to do this one again. I'm going to show you this one again. So again, if we're starting something new, we're always going to start with a ray. So here is a ray. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make an arc on our original angle here. Okay. And where that arc is, we are going to copy that arc down here. When you're using your compass, you want to make sure you have a nice tight grip on that piece so that when you swivel this, you do have a nice clean arc. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the distance along that arc so that we can copy that distance and figure out where that other point needs to be on this arc here. So we're going to put our point on one point, and we're going to open it all the way up to the other point. Now sometimes you can't use that inner one. You have to use the outer one. I just have it always try to use the inner one unless it's not possible, just because then I know which hole I used. I don't have to try to remember. All right, so there's my nice large arc. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to copy that same arc. And that intersection right there is where the other ray of my angle is going to be. So maybe this is angle D that I just made. And if you're going to be doing this online, it'll tell you exactly what to name your angles and which colors to put it in. So that way I can obviously see what you did first, second, third, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth. So I know that angle B is congruent to angle D. And that's our statement. So that is congruent angles. The next basic construction is going to be the angle bisector. Now that is to cut an angle in half. Okay, so that's the one that has this loop-de-loop. So I'm going to make an arc. And then once I have that arc made, it's very important that you put the points on that arc. Okay, because that's going to be where we make that loop-de-loop from. That's what I call those things. I just made it up, so that's what they remind me of, a loop-de-loop. From here, you're going to make one arc from that other point you found. you're going to make another arc, and then that loop-de-loop, which I think it looks like an eyeball to me. Like if you were to draw the eyeball here, and then it's, you know, looking at you. So that's what you're looking for. Maybe a fish, I don't know. But anything to help you remember. Okay, so now that we have that loop-de-loop on there, what we're going to do is we're going to connect the vertex of the angle with that point we found. And then this ray, I'm going to highlight it so you guys can see. So we have our original angle. Is this yellow highlighted angle there. And then this green ray that's the angle bisector. Now notice it looks like it cuts the angle in half. This half and this half appear to be the same size, and they should. If you do this correctly, they should appear to be the same size. Okay. Some people, again, were trying to do the loop-de-loops from the arrows. The arrows don't mean anything in the diagram. They are just they're just showing that this line continues forever in this direction. Okay. So try this next one. We're going to start with the arc. Remember, you want your arcs to be as large as what you can make them, whether it's where they're still on the diagram. So notice I tried to get to the end. Obviously, it's not to the end of this one because it wouldn't intersect on this side. And then we would have had to extend that ray. You're going to put the points there because that's what's important in this. We go. We have our loop-de-loop and this intersection right here from the vertex there is going to be where that angle bisector will be. Start with that arc, points on both ends. And this one almost goes off the paper. If it were to go off the paper, then we would have to use a different size arc, okay? Especially if this was a test, or next week or the following week you'll have your Unit 1 Part 2 test. And if your arcs were to be off the paper and you couldn't see this intersection right here, you cannot just guess where that intersection would be. You would have to erase it and start over and use a different size arc so that it would be on your paper still, okay? So that is those are your angle bisectors. So it's cutting the angle in half. And notice all of these appear to cut the angle in half. So make sure that yours appears that way, because if it didn't, then something probably went wrong. Okay? Make sure you're using the points that you found, not random points on there. All right, and the last one is going to be perpendicular bisectors. So I know the first time I explained it, I said that your arc should go all the way across. If it goes 3/4 of the way across, that is sufficient enough. The problem is if it only goes here, not quite halfway or just barely halfway, the problem is you don't have an intersection. Let me let that focus and then you can see that. Okay, so if you make your arcs too small, they don't intersect and you don't see that loop-de-loop, the loop-de-loop where you see the intersection. Okay, the kind of like a pointed oval is what it almost looks like. So we were doing perpendicular bisectors here. Now a perpendicular bisector is going to cut a segment in half and create a 90-degree angle, a right angle. Now you do have to be careful. We talked about if the arcs are going to be too short, then they're not going to intersect. If you make it about halfway, they're going to intersect, but barely. And what happens is it's not as accurate the closer these points are together. So you want to make your arcs quite large. And that's why on that first example, I did show you to make the arc as large as the segment. The only problem is sometimes what happens is if you make it as large as the segment, like this one's going to go off the page. So I can't make it quite that large. So I'm going to go about 3/4 of the way across. And when I do that, I have a nice large arc. There it is. There you can see it. I'm going to move it all the way to where the other point is. So the other end. Now, some people will make the mistake and accidentally put their point on the arc. If you do that, you'll notice you should be able to see that your perpendicular bisector would be off-centered. It needs to appear that this bisector, it would still be a right angle, but it wouldn't be in the center. You wouldn't be able to tell that those two segments are congruent, okay? That this is going to be the midpoint of this whole segment. It would be off-centered if you didn't use the endpoints. So if you see that happening, then make sure you're going by the end, doing a loop, going to the other end, making the loop. So now you have the loop-de-loop, connect them, you're good to go. So I'll do another one down here. So from the end point, I'm going to go about 3/4 of the way across. Again, this one, you might be able to go all the way across, but you might run out of room. It's important that you don't change the setting on your compass and that you use that same hole. You have the loop-de-loop. You connect those two intersections. That's a right angle. And that is cut in half. Now notice I didn't mark anything on my line that I drew because a line goes on forever. So what I drew in is a line that goes on forever. The segment that was there, that is what's cut in half. Okay. So that was the last basic construction. Those are your 4 basic ones that you're going to have to know. When we get into the multi-step ones, you're going to use these 4 basic constructions to construct those.